So here's the thing about the Galactic Defense Academy. When you're talking about the most prestigious military institution in 7,000 star systems, you'd think they'd have their act together. You'd be wrong, but you'd think it. The Armory certification exam happened once every solar cycle, and if you passed, you were basically guaranteed a spot in any military, peacekeeping force, or mercenary company worth a damn. We're talking about the kind of credential that made your parents brag to their friends across 3 parsecs. Thousands of species showed up. Hundreds failed. It was brutal, it was legendary, and it absolutely required energy weapons. That last part was in bold on the application. Twice. Which makes it extra funny that Jake Dalton showed up 20 minutes late carrying a duffel bag that looked like it had survived a bar fight. Jake was human, which already put him at a disadvantage in the eyes of most people there. Humans were the new kids on the galactic block. They'd only had faster-than-light travel for about 40 years, which in cosmic terms was basically yesterday. Most species looked at humans the way you'd look at a toddler trying to join a chess tournament. Cute, but probably gonna cry. Jake didn't look like much either. Scruffy brown hair, academy jumpsuit that he'd clearly slept in, and the kind of lazy confidence that said he either knew exactly what he was doing or had absolutely no idea and didn't care. Could have gone either way. The exam hall was massive, cathedral-sized, with a ceiling that disappeared into atmospheric processors somewhere up in the gloom. Weapon racks lined the walls like some kind of sci-fi museum, and holographic targets flickered in and out of existence across a field that stretched for half a kilometer. The whole place hummed with the sound of charging capacitors and nervous aliens checking their gear. Standing at the front, arms crossed all 4 of them, was Commandant Vril. Vril was a Saurian, which meant he looked like what would happen if you gave a velociraptor a military education and a superiority complex. Scales like burnished copper, eyes like a predator that had never missed a meal, and a voice that could strip paint off a hull. "Cadets," Vril announced, his voice booming across the hall. "Today you will prove your worth. Today you will demonstrate that you possess the skill, the discipline, and the technology to defend civilized space. Today, you will show me you are not complete and utter wastes of oxygen." Real inspirational guy. Jake dropped his duffel bag on the floor with a thud that echoed. A few heads turned. Sitting near him were his usual academy acquaintances. Corva, an insectoid from the Chitara hives, was lovingly polishing her plasma rifle like it was her firstborn child. She had compound eyes that glittered with reflected light, and mandibles that clicked when she got excited. Which was often. "You are late, Dalton," she chittered without looking up. Typical mammal behavior. No sense of time. "Traffic was murder," Jake said, dropping into a seat. 3-dimensional traffic. Who designed this system? Seriously. Next to Corva sat Thump. Nobody knew Thump's species name because it was apparently 47 syllables of rocks grinding together. So everyone called him Thump, which he seemed fine with. He was 2 meters of living granite with a heart of gold and the anxiety levels of a nervous chihuahua. His massive stone fingers were currently fiddling with an antimatter cannon that looked comically small in his hands. "Jake," Thump rumbled, his voice like an avalanche in slow motion. "I do not think I can do this. What if I fail? What if I drop my weapon? What if I accidentally cause a localized extinction event?" "You'll be fine, buddy," Jake said, patting Thump's boulder-like shoulder. "Just point it at the targets, not at us. That is not as reassuring as you think it is." Commandant Vril's eyes swept across the assembled cadets, lingering on Jake with what could only be described as disgust. "Before we begin, equipment inspection. Present your weapons for certification." This was the part where things got interesting. The equipment check was basically a parade of who could bring the most absurdly overpowered piece of military hardware. And let me tell you, aliens do not understand the concept of restraint. First up was a Zelthian with a photon disruptor that required its own cooling backpack. Then a Kryn with dual plasma pistols that hummed like angry wasps. Corva stepped forward with her rifle, which she introduced like it was her prom date. "Military-grade Hive-Tech pulse rifle," she announced proudly, mandibles clicking. 1,500 rounds per minute. Self-correcting aim assist, and the effective range of 3 kilometers. It cost me 4 years of savings. Vril nodded approvingly. "Acceptable. Next." Thump lumbered forward with his cannon, which he held like a child holding a toy they were pretty sure they'd stolen. "Antimatter displacement cannon," he mumbled. "I am terrified of it." "Adequate," Vril said. "Next." This went on for a while. Each weapon was more ridiculous than the last. Particle accelerators, graviton beams. One student brought something that was apparently banned in 17 systems and had to be checked by 3 safety officers. The air smelled like ozone and overcompensation. Then Jake stood up, walked to the front, and unzipped his duffel bag. The sound of the zipper was probably the loudest thing in the room at that moment. He reached in and pulled out a crossbow. Not a fancy crossbow. Not some sci-fi hybrid abomination. A straight-up, honest-to-God, medieval-ass crossbow with a wooden stock, modern tactical rail system, and a scope that looked like he'd ordered it off the human internet. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you probably could have heard a pin think about dropping. Corva's mandibles stopped mid-click. Thump's eyes widened, which for a rock creature was quite the achievement. Somewhere in the back, someone laughed, then quickly stopped, when no one else joined in. Commandant Vril stared at the crossbow like Jake had just pulled out a dead fish and declared it his weapon of choice. "Cadet Dalton," Vril said slowly, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining breathing to plants. "That is a projectile weapon. A primitive projectile weapon. This examination requires energy weapons. It says so on the application, in bold, twice." "Does it though?" Jake asked, pulling out a datapad. "Because I read the actual regulation code. Section 7, paragraph 4. Quote, cadets must present a handheld projectile weapon capable of engaging targets at range. End quote. Doesn't say energy, just says projectile." He held up a crossbow bolt. "This is a projectile. It gets propelled. From my handheld weapon. Seems pretty straightforward." Vril's scales actually changed color slightly, shifting toward an angry bronze. The spirit of the regulation clearly implies. "But the letter of the regulation says projectile weapon," Jake interrupted. "And I'm pretty sure military law cares more about letters than spirits, unless you guys rewrote physics while I wasn't looking." You had to admire the sheer audacity. Here was a human, from a species most of the galaxy still considered adorable primitives, citing regulations at a Saurian commandant who'd been enforcing military protocol since before Jake's grandparents were born. Vril's forearms tensed. You could practically see him running through the regulation database in his head, looking for a loophole, any loophole, to disqualify this absolute madman. He found nothing. "Fine," Vril hissed. "You may proceed with your wood and string. I look forward to watching you humiliate yourself and your species. Perhaps this will teach Earth to send properly equipped cadets in the future." "Appreciate the vote of confidence, sir," Jake said, cheerfully, slinging the crossbow over his shoulder. As he walked back to his spot, Corva leaned over. "You are insane. You know that, yes? Clinically insane." "Probably," Jake agreed, loading a bolt into the crossbow with a satisfying click. "But I'm also right, which is my favorite kind of insane." Thump looked at the crossbow, then at his antimatter cannon, then back at the crossbow. "Jake, I do not wish to be negative, but I think you are going to die." "We'll see," Jake said. "We'll see." Commandant Vril moved to the center of the hall, his voice amplified across every speaker. "Cadets, take your positions. The Armory certification exam begins now. Try not to embarrass your homeworlds more than absolutely necessary." He looked directly at Jake when he said that last part. Jake just smiled and checked his scope. This was going to be fun. The first phase of the exam was straightforward, moving targets at ranges from 50 to 500 meters. Score points by hitting center mass. Lose points by missing entirely or hitting barriers. Simple enough that even Thump seemed slightly less terrified, which was saying something. "Begin," Vril announced. The hall erupted in sound. Plasma rifles screeched. Photon cannons whined. Energy weapons discharged with the kind of noise that made your teeth hurt and your ancestors question your life choices. The air filled with the smell of ionized particles and burning ozone. It was like standing inside a lightning storm that had anger management issues. And the hit rate? Abysmal. Corva fired her first shot. The recoil knocked her back 3 steps, and her bolt of superheated plasma sailed 2 meters over her target. She clicked her mandibles in frustration and adjusted her stance. "Stupid compensators," she muttered. "The sales alien said there would be no recoil." "The sales alien lied to you," Jake called over. She fired again. This time she hit a target. The wrong target. The one that belonged to the cadet next to her, who gave her a very dirty look. Down the line, a Krin's photon disruptor overheated after 6 shots and went into mandatory cooldown. The Krin started smacking it, which definitely wasn't helping. Another cadet's particle accelerator jammed because apparently even future technology still has jam problems. Thump raised his antimatter cannon, took careful aim, and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. He pulled it again. Still nothing. "Safety," Jake said without looking. "The little switch on the side." "Oh, right, thank you." Thump flipped the safety off, aimed again, and fired. The cannon roared like an angry god. The target exploded. So did the target behind it. And the barrier behind that. and a small section of the wall that probably didn't need that hole. Thump immediately dropped the cannon and put his hands up. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not mean to do that. Please do not arrest me. Acceptable damage, Vril announced, though he looked like he just aged 5 years. Control your fire, cadet. Meanwhile, Jake had taken up position in a corner, Crossbow resting on a convenient ledge. While everyone else was blasting away like they were trying to kill the target's entire extended families, he was doing something revolutionary. He was aiming. The crossbow made almost no sound, just a soft thwick as the bolt released and a distant thunk when it hit home. Center mass. Clean hit. He loaded another bolt, adjusted slightly for wind because yes, the environmental systems in the hull created wind patterns, because nothing in this place made sense, and fired again. Thwick. Thunk. Another hit. No recoil. No muzzle flash. No overheating. No cooldown. No power cell depletion. Just simple mechanical advantage that humans had perfected roughly 800 years ago, and apparently never felt the need to completely abandon. You have got to be kidding me, Corva chittered, watching Jake casually nail his 5th target in a row while her rifle's targeting computer recalibrated for the 3rd time. No recharge time, Jake explained conversationally, lining up another shot. No electronic signature. No heat bloom. Can't be jammed because there's nothing electronic to jam. Just physics, baby. Beautiful, simple Newtonian physics. Thwick. Thunk. 6 for 6. A Zelthian nearby fired his photon disruptor at a target 300 meters out. The beam scattered in the atmospheric processors and hit nothing. He fired again. Same result. His weapon's display was flashing warnings about optimal range and atmospheric interference. Jake's crossbow didn't have a display. It also didn't care about atmospheric interference. It just sent pointy sticks flying in ballistic arcs that had been mathematically understood since humans were throwing rocks at their dinner. This is impossible, Corva said, watching Jake hit his 10th consecutive target. You are using primitive technology. It should not work this well. That's the thing about primitive technology, Jake said, loading another bolt. It's primitive because it's so old it's had time to be perfected. Your rifle's been in production for what, 20 years? This design's been around for centuries. All the bugs are worked out. Thwick. Thunk. Plus, Jake continued, when everyone's expecting energy weapons, they optimize all their defenses for energy weapons. Radar signatures, thermal tracking, electromagnetic countermeasures. Know what none of that detects. A wooden stick flying through the air propelled by stored mechanical energy. Commandant Vril was watching now. Really watching. His scaled face was unreadable, but his 4 arms were crossed in a way that suggested he was having some very complicated thoughts about military doctrine and possibly his entire career. Jake proceeded to do something that probably shouldn't have been possible. He started doing trick shots. There was a target partially hidden behind a barrier. Jake calculated the angle, aimed at a reflective panel on the far wall, and fired. The bolt bounced off the panel at exactly the right trajectory and nailed the hidden target. Did you just bank shot a crossbow bolt? Thump asked, his gravelly voice filled with awe. Geometry, Jake said with a shrug. Also, practice. Lots of practice. Humans have been hunting with these things forever. You learn tricks. By the time the first phase ended, the score display was showing results that were making several cadets question their life choices. Jake Dalton was sitting comfortably in the top 5, having hit 23 out of 25 targets with a weapon that most of the galaxy would have put in a museum. Corva had hit 11 targets, missed 9, and accidentally set fire to one of the barriers. Thump had hit 3 targets but destroyed so much property that his score had penalties. The Kryn with the photon disruptor had given up and was crying quietly in a corner. And Commandant Vril was staring at Jake's crossbow like it had personally insulted his entire species. Phase 2 begins in 5 minutes. Vril announced. I suggest you all prepare yourselves. Jake just smiled and started waxing his bowstring. This was going exactly according to plan. Phase 2 was specifically designed to separate the competent from the truly skilled. It was also, as it turned out, specifically designed to humiliate anyone stupid enough to bring a crossbow to an energy weapons exam. At least, that's what Commandant Vril thought. Phase 2, Vril announced with what could only be described as malicious glee, tests your ability to adapt to adverse conditions. In combat, equipment fails, systems malfunction. A true warrior must be prepared for anything. He gestured to the exam hall with 2 of his 4 arms. You will now face a series of targets under equipment stress conditions, environmental hazards, system interference. And yes, before anyone asks, electromagnetic disruption. Several cadets shifted nervously. Electromagnetic pulses were the nightmare scenario for energy weapons. One good EMP and your fancy plasma rifle became an expensive club. Corva's mandibles clicked anxiously. Surely they would not use a full EMP. That would disable everything. That is precisely the point, Vril said, and he actually smiled. It was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting years to teach entitled cadets a lesson about over-reliance on technology. Jake, meanwhile, was checking his bolts. Just counting them, making sure they were straight, living his best medieval life. Begin, Vril commanded. The targets activated. These ones were faster, more erratic, designed to test tracking and prediction. The cadets opened fire with renewed determination. Energy beams crisscrossed the hall like the galaxy's most dangerous laser light show. Then, approximately 30 seconds in, every light in the hall flickered, and the EMP hit. It wasn't a subtle thing. The electromagnetic pulse washed over the exam hall like an invisible wave, and every energy weapon died instantly. Plasma rifles went dark, photon cannons stopped humming, targeting computers blanked out. The hall went from sounding like a war zone to sounding like a library where everyone had just received terrible news. No, Corva whispered, staring at her rifle's dead display screen. No. This cost me 4 years of savings. She slapped the side of her rifle. Nothing. She shook it. Still nothing. She held it up to her compound eyes and whispered to it like a parent trying to wake a sleeping child. Please work. I will take better care of you. I promise. The rifle remained aggressively non-functional. Thump had set down his antimatter cannon and was just sitting next to it, looking like someone had told him his best friend moved away. I knew this would happen. I knew it. I am not cut out for this. All down the line, cadets were experiencing various stages of technological grief. Some were frantically pressing for buttons. Others were removing power cells and reinserting them, as if maybe they just inserted them wrong the first 70 times. One cadet was actually crying. The targets kept moving, and Jake kept shooting. Thwick, thunk. Every head in the hall turned. Jake was casually nailing targets like absolutely nothing had happened. Because for him, nothing had happened. The EMP had washed over his crossbow the same way it had washed over everything else, and his crossbow had responded by continuing to be a stick and some string that didn't care about electromagnetic anything. You have got to be absolutely kidding me, Corva said, watching Jake hit another target. What? Jake asked innocently, loading another bolt. Did something happen? I heard a weird noise. The EMP, a nearby Zelthian said weakly. The electromagnetic pulse. It disabled all our weapons. Jake looked at his crossbow, then back at the Zelthian. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Electromagnetic. This thing's mostly wood and metal. No magnets, no electronics, no pulse to disrupt. He fired again. Another hit. I spent 8,000 credits on that rifle, Corva said quietly. 8,000 credits. And you are beating me with medieval technology, and what I assume was a modest purchase from a human sporting goods store. $75 on sale, Jake confirmed. Plus another 40 for the scope. And yeah, before you ask, that's cheap. Very cheap. Commandant Vril was no longer looking smug. He was looking like a man watching his entire worldview crumble in real time. His scales had shifted to a color that could only be described as confused bronze. But here's where Jake decided to twist the knife. He started doing the trick shots again. There was a target moving on a rail system, ducking behind barriers in a predictable pattern. Jake didn't shoot when it was visible. He waited until it was behind a barrier, calculated the timing, and fired at the barrier itself. The bolt punched through the thin material and hit the target on the other side. Did you just shoot through a wall? Thump asked. Barrier. Jake corrected. Walls are thicker. And yeah, crossbow bolts are kind of famous for their penetration. Medieval armies used to shoot through armor with these things. A thin composite barrier? That's nothing. He demonstrated this again by shooting a bolt that went through one barrier, hit a target, continued through that target because apparently he'd loaded armor-piercing bolts like a complete maniac and embedded itself in the wall behind. Jesus, Jake, came a voice from somewhere. It might have been God. It might have been another cadet. At this point, who could tell? Another target appeared, this one moving in a figure-8 pattern. Jake tracked it, led it by about 2 meters to account for travel time, and fired. The bolt and the target arrived at the same point in space at exactly the same moment. Physics for the win. The other cadets had mostly given up on their weapons and were now just watching Jake's one-man show. Even the ones whose weapons had come back online after the EMP pulse ended were too demoralized to continue. They'd spent years training on advanced technology, And here was a human with a weapon their ancestors would recognize, casually outperforming all of them. Corva set down her rifle and walked over to Jake. I hate you. I need you to know this. I deeply, spiritually hate you. That's fair, Jake said. But also, this is the most impressed I have been in my entire life. Also fair. By the time Phase 2 ended, Jake had scored more points in the technical challenge than the next 3 cadets combined. His crossbow hadn't misfired once, hadn't overheated once, hadn't needed recharging once, and hadn't experienced a single technical difficulty, because it had exactly 0 technology to experience difficulties with. The scoreboard updated. Jake Dalton was now in first place. By a lot. Commandant Vril stared at the scoreboard like it had personally betrayed him. Phase 3, he said slowly, will be different. Phase 3 is live combat simulation. Let us see how your primitive weapon fares against adaptive targets. There was an edge to his voice. A challenge. A desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this was where the human's luck ran out. Jake just checked his remaining bolts and smiled. Bring it on, sir. Phase 3 was the big one. The phase that separated Academy legends from Academy footnotes. Live combat simulation against autonomous defense drones programmed with actual military-grade AI, and roughly 10 years of tactical data from real conflicts. These weren't target dummies. These were machines designed to hunt, evade, and eliminate threats. They had adaptive learning algorithms, predictive movement software, and sensor suites that could detect a gnat's heat signature from half a kilometer away. The exam hall reconfigured itself. Walls rose from the floor, barriers deployed, lighting shifted to simulate various combat environments. The whole thing transformed into an urban warfare maze that looked like it had been copy-pasted from a war zone. The rules are simple, Vril announced, and he actually looked excited now. This was his moment. This was where the human's luck ended. Eliminate all hostile drones before they eliminate you. The drones are equipped with non-lethal suppression systems, but I assure you, getting hit still hurts. A lot. You have 15 minutes. Begin when ready. Cadets entered one at a time. It was not going well for anyone. The first cadet, a Kryn, lasted 45 seconds before 3 drones triangulated his position from his weapon's energy signature and lit him up with stun bolts. He limped out looking like he'd been hit by a truck. An angry, electric truck. Corva went next. Her fancy pulse rifle with its self-correcting aim assist immediately attracted every drone in the sector like moths to a very expensive flame. She managed to take down 2 drones before the other 8 converged on her position. She lasted 2 minutes. Respectable, but not great. The drones are programmed to prioritize energy weapon signatures, she explained afterward, mandibles clicking in frustration. They detect the charge buildup, the thermal bloom, the electromagnetic field. By the time you fire, they have already calculated your position and started evasive maneuvers. Thump's turn was brief and loud. He destroyed 4 drones and a significant portion of the urban warfare set before the remaining drones realized he couldn't actually aim his cannon and just waited for him to run out of space to fire safely. He surrendered after 3 minutes, apologizing profusely to everyone in earshot. Other cadets fared similarly. The drones were just too good, too fast, too smart. Their threat assessment algorithms had been refined against every major military power in the galaxy. They knew what to look for. They knew what was dangerous. Then Jake walked into the maze carrying his crossbow. The drones activated. Their sensors swept the area, scanning for threats. Thermal imaging, electromagnetic detection, motion tracking, chemical sniffers, acoustic analysis. Every sensor system cross-referencing every database looking for the telltale signature of a weapon, and they found nothing. Because Jake's crossbow didn't have an energy signature. It didn't have a thermal bloom. It didn't have an electromagnetic field. It was wood and metal at ambient temperature, and the drone's threat detection AI literally could not classify it as dangerous. To the drones, Jake looked like a guy holding a stick. They flew right past him. Jake watched a drone hover approximately 3 meters away. Its sensors pointed in completely the wrong direction, scanning for plasma signatures that didn't exist. He raised his crossbow, aimed, and fired. Thwick. The bolt punched through the drone's central processor. It dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The other drones still didn't register a threat. The AI had apparently decided that whatever just happened must have been a mechanical failure. Drones malfunction sometimes. No big deal. Jake moved through the urban maze like he was on a nature hike. The drones flew search patterns around him, scanning for energy weapons that would never appear. He picked them off one by one, each shot silent and invisible to their sensors. It was like watching someone hunt pigeons with future technology, except the future technology was the pigeon. From the observation deck, the other cadets watched in stunned silence. "This should not be possible," Corva whispered. "Those drones have military-grade AI. They have defeated Hive commanders. They have training data from 6 major wars." "Yeah," Jake said from inside the maze, his voice coming through the comm system. "But I bet none of those wars involved crossbows, huh? Bit of an oversight in the training data." He shot another drone. It never saw it coming, literally. Its threat assessment system had ranked Jake somewhere between potted plant and mild inconvenience. "The drones cannot detect him," Thump said with awe. "He is invisible to them. Not actually invisible, but invisible to their sensors, which is functionally the same thing." Jake moved deeper into the maze. A drone finally got suspicious when 3 of its partners went offline in the same sector. It flew in to investigate, sensors at maximum sensitivity, searching for any sign of an energy weapon. Jake was crouched behind a barrier, perfectly still. The drone flew within 2 meters of him. He waited until it passed, then shot it in the back. "That's 5, he announced cheerfully. The remaining drones finally started adapting. Their AI shifted parameters. If energy signatures weren't working, they'd try motion tracking, thermal imaging, acoustic triangulation. Jake responded by using tactics that were old when humanity still thought the Earth was flat. He moved slowly when drones were looking. He used cover. He predicted their search patterns and stayed 1 step ahead. He even threw a rock once to create a distraction, which worked better than it had any right to. "Did he just throw a rock?" a cadet asked. "He threw a rock," Corva confirmed. "At military-grade AI, and it worked." 1 drone got smart and started using spray fire to flush him out. Jake responded by shooting the drone through a gap in the barriers that was roughly 15 centimeters wide. The bolt threaded the needle perfectly, and the drone joined its friends on the ground. "That's just showing off," Corva muttered. "Yeah," Jake's voice came through the comm, maybe a little. By minute 8, all 15 drones were disabled. Jake emerged from the maze without a scratch, crossbow slung over his shoulder, looking like he'd just finished a light jog. The observation deck was silent. Then Thump started laughing. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, then built into a full avalanche of mirth. "He beat military AI with a wooden stick. A wooden stick!" Corva's mandibles were clicking uncontrollably. "This is the greatest thing I have ever seen. I am still angry, but this is the greatest thing I have ever seen." Other cadets started applauding. Then more joined in. Within seconds, the entire observation deck was cheering for the human who'd just made the most advanced combat simulation in the galaxy. Looked like it had been programmed by someone's cousin who was pretty good with computers. Commandant Vril stood absolutely still, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides, his scaled face the color of tarnished bronze. His entire career had been built on the supremacy of advanced military technology, and a human had just dismantled that belief with a weapon from the Middle Ages. "Scoring complete," the automated system announced. "Final results will be displayed momentarily." Jake walked over to where Corva and Thump were standing. "So," he said casually, "how'd I do?" The scoreboard flickered to life, and the numbers told a story that was going to be retold in academy bars for the next 20 years. First place, by a margin so wide it looked like a clerical error, Cadet Jake Dalton, human, Earth. Final score, 94.7%. Highest score in Galactic Defense Academy history. The previous record had been 88.2, held by a Saurian general who'd gone on to command 3 fleet groups and had a military district named after him. Second place, Corva, with a respectable 71.3. Third place, Thump, 68.9, with a footnote about property damage. The observation deck erupted in chaos. Cadets were talking over each other, checking their datapads to make sure the scoreboard wasn't malfunctioning, and generally experiencing the kind of cognitive dissonance that comes from watching everything you thought you knew get disproven by a guy with a wooden stick. Commandant Vril stood at the podium, holding the ceremonial Armory certification medal, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. His scales had gone through about 17 different color changes in the last 30 seconds. "Cadet Dalton," he said, his voice strained. "Approach." Jake walked up, still carrying his crossbow, and stood at attention. Well, his version of attention, which was more like a casual suggestion of military bearing. Vril looked at the medal, then at Jake, then at the crossbow, then back at the medal, as if hoping it might have disappeared. It hadn't. "Cadet Dalton," Vril began, and you could practically hear his jaw clenching. "You have achieved the highest score in the history of this academy. Your performance was, objectively speaking, exceptional. Thank you, sir. I hate it, Vril continued. I hate everything about what just happened. I hate that it worked. I hate that it makes sense. I hate that I now have to revise 30 years of tactical doctrine because a human brought a medieval weapon to an advanced warfare examination and embarrassed everyone. If it helps, sir, I'm pretty embarrassed too. For everyone else, I mean. Several cadets laughed. Vril's eye twitched. It does not help, Vril said. He held up the medal with all the enthusiasm of someone holding a live grenade. But regulations are regulations. For achieving the highest score in Academy history, I present you with the Armory Master certification, with honors. He placed the medal around Jake's neck like he was being forced to at gunpoint. Congratulations, Vril said flatly. You have ruined my day, my week, and possibly my career. Well done. Happy to help, sir. The observation deck erupted in applause again. Corva was clicking her mandibles so rapidly it sounded like applause on its own. Thump was making sounds that might have been laughter or might have been a rock slide. Hard to tell. Jake stepped up to the podium for the traditional acceptance speech. He looked out at the assembled cadets, most of whom were still trying to process what they'd just witnessed. So here's the thing, Jake began. Every species in the galaxy has been developing weapons for thousands of years. And yeah, you guys got to energy weapons first. They're powerful, they're impressive, and they make really cool sounds. A few chuckles from the crowd. But here's what happens when everyone's using the same type of technology. Everyone designs defenses for that technology. Your sensors look for energy signatures. Your armor's rated for plasma and particle beams. Your tactics assume certain things about how weapons work. He held up his crossbow. Humans got to the stars late. We're still figuring out plasma rifles and photon cannons. But we spent thousands of years perfecting the old ways. And sometimes, when everyone's prepared for the new ways, the old ways work great. Not because they're better, but because nobody's expecting them. Jake looked directly at Commandant. Vril. That's not primitive technology. That's specialized technology. There's a difference. Vril's expression suggested he was having several complicated thoughts about military doctrine, human audacity, and whether early retirement was looking more appealing than it had this morning. Anyway, Jake continued. Thanks for the medal. This has been fun. Oh, and before I forget. He reached down and opened his duffel bag again. The entire observation deck went silent. Worried silent. The kind of silent that happens when someone who's already caused enough chaos reaches for a second mystery item. Jake pulled out a compound bow. Modern, carbon fiber, with enough pulleys and cams to make it look like it had been designed by an engineer with too much time and too much coffee. I brought a backup, he said cheerfully. In case the crossbow broke. This one's got a 60-pound draw weight and can shoot 300 feet per second. Just, for reference. Commandant Vril made a sound that might have been a word in Saurian, but mostly just sounded like pain. Corva walked up to Jake, her compound eyes glittering. Can I try it? The crossbow, I mean. I need to understand how you made this work. Sure, Jake said, handing it over. Fair warning, it's all manual. No aim assist. No targeting computer. Just you, the bow, and math. I have 4 years of advanced mathematics, Corva said confidently. She raised the crossbow, aimed at a practice target someone had left out, and fired. The bolt went wide by about 2 meters. Okay, she admitted. Perhaps there is more to this than mathematics. Thump lumbered over, his massive stone hand extended. May I? I wish to see if I can operate primitive human technology. Jake handed him a bolt. Might need to get you a bigger crossbow, maybe a ballista. What is a ballista? Siege weapon. Medieval artillery. Used to shoot giant arrows at castles. Thump's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered his and. True calling. I would like to learn more about this ballista. For research purposes. I'm sure you would, buddy. As cadets crowded around to examine the crossbow and ask Jake increasingly technical questions about draw weight and bolt velocity, Commandant Vril stood alone at the podium, staring at the scoreboard. One of his fellow instructors, a Kryn named Zella, approached him carefully. So, Zella said, human brings crossbow to energy weapons exam, outscores everyone in Academy history. How does that make you feel? Vril was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, we need to revise our threat assessment protocols. Immediately. And possibly our recruitment standards. And definitely our weapons regulations. Because of the human? Because if one human with a crossbow can do this, imagine what they'll do when they really understand our technology. Vril turned to look at Jake, who was now demonstrating proper bolt-loading technique to a fascinated crowd. They've been in space for 40 years, 40. And they're already finding holes in systems we've used for centuries. That's terrifying, Zella said. No, Vril corrected. That's humanity. He picked up his datapad and started typing. What are you doing? Zella asked. Updating our tactical database, Vril said. New entry, humans, threat level, unpredictable, preferred tactics. Whatever you're not expecting. Recommended defense, hope they're on your side. From across the hall, Jake caught Vril's eye and gave him a cheerful thumbs up. Vril did not return the gesture, but somewhere, deep in his military mind, he was already imagining what a human special forces unit with a proper equipment budget could accomplish. It was a terrifying thought. It was also, he had to admit, kind of exciting. Welcome to the galactic stage, humanity. Please try not to break everything. Though honestly, it was probably too late for that.